Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah De Silva, and my activity analysis I'm going to be presenting today is going to be on drinking the tea. Alrighty. So, we're going to talk about the purpose and meaning, what it means to me. So, drinking tea is one of my favorite daily occupations that provides me with a sense of comfort and sanity. Just like how people need a cup of coffee to survive the day, I need a big cup of tea to start and end my day. Washing my face, exercising, or stretching does not seem to wake me up. But when I drink a nice warm cup of tea, I feel alert and ready to go. Unlike coffee, tea leaves you with no jitters and gives you a steady release of energy that you can carry it throughout the day. It comes in a variety of flavors that are either caffeinated or decaffeinated. In the morning, I prefer an assortment of green tea, but towards the evening, I always end my day with some herbal tea. Culturally, tea is important to me because we use it in a greeting aspect when we go to a relative's house, and we also use it ceremonially. Alrighty, so now we're going to move on. So we're going to start off by talking about the position of the body, and then we're going to follow into the action steps. So, the position of the body relative to this activity would be sitting upright in a chair with your head in a neutral position. To sit upright, you're going to need your posterior and anterior muscles that are going to work together as synergists to keep the trunk upright. The posterior muscles include the erector spinae group, the transversospinalis group, and the interspinalis, whereas the anterior muscles consist of the rectus abdominis, the external oblique, internal oblique, and the transversus abdominis. This would be seen as an isometric contraction. So, in order to keep the head in neutral, it involves the muscles of the anterior C spine and the posterior C spine. The anterior C spine muscles include the sternocleidomastoid, the scalenes, and the prevertebral group, whereas the posterior C spine muscles include the splenius capitis, splenius cervacis, erector spinae group, suboccipital group, and the transversospinalis. These muscles work together in synergy of one another to produce an isometric contraction. All right, so now we're going to move on to the action steps. So the first one we're going to be talking about is grabbing the mug. So, starting from the shoulder, the action step to grab the mug consists of using the glenohumeral joint. Since there is approximately about less than 30 degrees of shoulder flexion to grab the mug, we can rule out the scapula and determine the prime mover to be the pectoralis major, coracobrachialis, and anterior deltoid. The forearm is seen at about 90 degrees in a neutral position, and the joints involved are the humeroradial and humeroulnar. Since this is an isometric contraction, the flexors would be the biceps brachii, the brachialis, and the brachioradialis. And the extensors would be seen as the triceps and anconeus. These flexors and extensors are going to work together in synergy of one another. All right, so now that we talked about that, we're going to move on to the second action step. So this is going to involve grip. The second action step is bringing your arm towards the mug and using a cylindrical grip to grasp the mug at the carpometacarpal joints. This concentric contraction involves using the flexor muscles of the fingers to flex the metacarpophalangeal joints, the proximal interphalangeal joints, and the distal interphalangeal joints. The prime movers for finger flexion involved would be the flexor digitorum profundus and the flexor digitorum superficialis. All right, and so now the third action step we're going to be talking about is going to be lifting the mug. So the third action step would be lifting the mug to your mouth. Since the mug has left the table and your forearm is doing all the work, the grip around your mug would be an isometric contraction. Whereas when you are flexing your elbow from 90 degrees to about 120 degrees, this would be seen as a concentric contraction. The joints involved in the elbow would be the humeroradial, humeroulnar, and the prime movers would be the biceps brachii and the brachialis and the brachioradialis. All right, so the next action step is going to be actually drinking the tea. So, action step number 4 involves radial deviation. As you flex your elbow towards your mouth, you will need to slightly radially deviate your wrist to approximately around 5 degrees at the radiocarpal joint in order to tilt the tea out of the cup. This is a concentric contraction that involves the flexor carpi radialis and the extensor carpi radialis longus. To open your mouth, there is going to be an eccentric contraction as you depress your mandible at the temporomandibular joint. Since it is an eccentric contraction, the muscles involved are the temporalis and the masseter. All right. And then lastly, the final action step is going to be putting the cup down. So the final action step of drinking tea is to put the cup down. In order to do this, you will need to have about 15 degrees of ulnar deviation at the radiocarpal joint to bring your wrist back into a neutral setting. This is done so the tea does not spill as you put it down. Since you are eccentrically contracting your wrist in a neutral position, the muscles involved are the flexor carpi radialis and the extensor carpi radialis longus. Closing your mouth involves a concentric contraction as you elevate the mandible at the temporomandibular joint. The prime movers for this muscle are the temporalis and the masseter. Lastly, you will need to extend your elbow back to 90 degrees. The humeroradial and humeral ulnar joint will still be involved as you eccentrically contract your biceps brachii, brachialis, and brachioradialis back to the starting position. All right, so now that we talked about the action steps, we're going to be talking about the uniqueness of drinking tea. So, when I drink tea, I notice that I inhale, hold my breath, and take a sip of my tea. I found it difficult to swallow my tea when I exhale, hold my breath, and drink the tea. Moreover, if you do not time drinking tea right, then you could choke on the fluids. Timing when drinking tea is very important because you want to make sure that it's the right temperature to be sipped on. If it's too hot, then you may burn your mouth, and if it's too cold, then it doesn't give you that same relaxed, soothing feeling. Lastly, depending on the type of mug, there can be various ways to hold it. Different grips, such as pad to pad and handle grips, can be used to hold the mug and enjoy the tea. All right, and lastly, we are going to talk about the adaptions. So we're going to talk about a patient who has right hemiparesis. Right. So a disability that can limit a person's ability to enjoy drinking tea would be someone who has right hemiparesis from a stroke and is right hand dominant. A person with this disability can be seen to have difficulty with their finger grip strength, wrist, forearm, and shoulder movements. This activity involves flexion and extension of the fingers, forearm, and shoulder, along with radial and ulnar deviation of the wrist. With these movements, it may be very difficult for a person to hold a mug, let alone grip it. Some adaptations that can be done would be to use a different mug that is less heavy, has 2 handles, and even has a non-spill lid on the mug. So as you can see in this picture, it's made out of plastic. It's not made out of ceramic. It has 2 handles, so they can either grip the handle or they can grip the actual cup itself, and it has a non-spill lid on it. So depending on the severity of the stroke, a straw can also be used as well. However, the temperature of the tea will need to be warm to avoid burns in their mouth. Lastly, if the patient has right hemiparesis, then using the dominant hand to drink the tea would be an adaptation, or they can also use their non-dominant hand to assist the impaired limb. And that is all I have for today. Thank you so much.